Hi, everybody. Dr. David here. So pleased to be back again. I'm here every couple months in this slot to talk about really this idea, as Tammy just said, about how addictions, especially in the last couple decades, but have really kind of merged into different kinds of addictive behaviors. I'm a recovering alcoholic, been in recovery a long time. When I got into AA some years ago, most of the people in there were sort of single users, right? They were addicted to alcohol, sometimes with cannabis or whatever thrown in. Over the years, we've started to see people with different, and the addictions have always been around, but we've started to see them kind of merge. And that's what I kind of want to talk about today, this phenomenon of co-occurring addictions, because I think we have a tendency sometimes to focus on our main problem, um, to the exclusion of kind of the other, what we might call secondary addictions. And the problem with those darn secondary addictions is they can lead to full-blown relapse of our primary if we're not careful. So just want to talk a little bit about the interaction, the articulation of those things, and then kind of just open it up. But so what we see almost always these days, I talked about that only alcoholic back in the day. We don't see that so much anymore, right? We see people that are addicted to multiple substances and or behaviors. And I think sometimes at Seeking Integrity, we get guys, obviously, who are addicted to sex and porn, who minimize or just kind of don't recognize the other substances that may be part of their addictive ritual. And I think that's a real issue to look at. So, for example, we know that sex and porn are of the two different kinds of addictive drugs and behaviors, they're more the stimulating kind, right? They add intensity. Those are the amphetamines and things like kleptomania and porn and sex and all the things that kind of get adrenaline and dopamine going. And so it's really easy for somebody to switch, and that's why this phenomenon of chemsex, which is the idea of using drugs and sex together, it's a natural because and oftentimes it's an unrecognized problem among the guys we see seeking integrity because they go in for sex or porn, but they also are using other drugs as part of their ritual and not even really recognizing it as part of it. And so this is kind of what I want to talk about today. And it can be something as simple alcohol, right? A very powerful drug, but a lot of sex and porn addicts look at the devastation in their lives, rightly so, caused by the sex and porn, but they don't, and they say, well, alcohol is not my problem. You know, sex and porn is what brought me to my knees. But the alcohol, they look at their addiction ritual, which is that whole long process from beginning to end, you know, we're keeping in mind that the using is the actual end of that stage. To get there, we have to have triggers. We go through these periods of preoccupation. We're kind of obsessed. We fantasize, a lot of playing with the idea and setting up the ritual. But very often, at the very beginning of that is alcohol. These are for sex and porn addicts. A drink or two, or sometimes cannabis, a toke or two will kind of set off this whole addictive ritual because it disinhibits them to get into the process of going online or looking for escorts or looking for creating a schedule where they have a slot where nobody knows where they are. But oftentimes it's alcohol or cannabis, and they may not even recognize it as a problem. The other thing I want to talk about is that once people get into recovery, when, say, for a sex addict to get into recovery, what happens? And to explain that, let me take a step back and talk about I look at addiction as a coping mechanism. It's like it's the way an addict deals with life, or probably more accurately, does not deal with life. We avoid stuff. But so if I'm having trouble with loneliness or anger or fear or jealousy or shame or any of these feelings that human beings have, you know, oftentimes an addict will turn to these behaviors or drugs to cover that over and move on. And so unless we deal with those root problems, right, unless we deal with the issues, and this is what seeking integrity is so good at, is just not just treating the substance or the behavior, but like, okay, what's going on to create this system of addiction in your life. So it's very easy when somebody kind of gets sober from sex or porn to just switch addictions to something else because they haven't totally really recognized what's causing me to do this in the first place. And so for sex addicts and porn addicts, the number one go-to is food. Food, very common for people, and this is true for drug and alcoholics too, to gain weight because they turn to sugar as a way to soothe their feelings. But food, work, we find guys jumping into work. In fact, our discharge planning at Seeking Integrity includes a commitment to the max number of hours people are going to work because we know from experience people just jump into 18-hour workdays. They still don't have to deal with their problems or their feelings. And so just this is all a kind of a word of warning to, yes, of course you have to recognize your primary addiction, but really beware of how easy it is to switch to other things. And, and I mentioned there are kind of two groupings, of the intensity side, if you will. We have the amphetamines, cocaine, methamphetamine, ADHD medications are often used by addicts to kind of get that to rev up and amp up their behavior. Sex porn, kleptomania adds that adrenaline. Those kinds of things. On the other side are more the numbing drugs and behaviors. So we'd find alcohol, different kinds of opioid drugs, food, binge watching TV, shopping. These are all things that kind of create a bubble of their own. And oftentimes we think of, well, I'm an intensity addict or I'm a kind of a numbing addict, but everybody's everything, right? We find that the intensity addicts, our sex and porn addicts, for example, at the end of their addictive ritual that I was talking about, after they do act out, what are they feeling? They're feeling shame, remorse. Oh my God, I've done it again. What have I done? That's the kind of feeling. They don't intensify that feeling. They want to numb that feeling. So very often a sex and porn addict will turn to alcohol or food or binge watching TV or something else to kind of numb their behavior at the end of their addictive cycle before the whole thing starts again. So my whole point here is that we can weave together multiple drugs, multiple behaviors into this whole addictive ritual. And if we only treat a piece of it, it really is going to highly increase the likelihood of relapse. But relapse, back to the main thing, by the way, if I'm just substituting another, I call it whack-a-mole, if I just move my addictive impulses to something else, trying to stay abstinent from my primary addiction, ultimately it's going to impact my ability to stay sober from whatever it is, including that primary piece. So it's just, there's a lot more about this in the book, Sex Under the Influence, which I'll self-servingly highly recommend. But I think there is a lot of good information in there that really does help, and a lot of tools too. So, oh yeah, so with that, I guess I'll stop and throw it open.
Well, and I was thinking how often we have guys that come into residential treatment who have been sober from alcohol and or drugs, for months or years,
30 years,
but
yeah.
their sex is, out of control. But they're like, but I'm sober, and we're both 12 steppers. So it's, if we're going to be happy, joyous, and free, we have to look at all of the maladaptive coping mechanisms, anything we're using that is external that we are trying to fill the hole in the soul. I was thinking too, it's like if we have to be intentional. And I do, and I think it's both partners and addicts that will minimize, well, alcohol isn't really the problem. This is the problem. And yes, this is really the problem. But if we're not looking at all of the different patterns, of things, like even gaming on phones, I mean, I see lots of people that are completely zoned out on, if it's 15 minutes, that's one thing. If it's like, well, I've lost 3 hours because, I'm just making this up, but if I've lost 3 hours, doing nothing, like, is that really the best, use? Am I being intentional of like, yes, I sat down to spend 3 hours on my phone? I don't know, but all of those things, eh, disconnect us.
Exactly. And that's, of course, the goal. Thank you for bringing this up, because a lot of times too, I just stuck to my list of addictive kinds of behaviors and drugs, but we look at the kind of these, what people think of as more benign, right? Like social media, Facebook, Instagram, kind of scrolling on that. Even getting into the news on social media, that's all very addictive. It really engages the same addictive impulses with dopamine than a primary addiction does. And by the way, we always warn our guys with pornography issues that what we call not porn, right? Things even on Facebook and Instagram, the thirst trap pictures and stuff. There's a lot of stuff it's not pornographic per se, but it's suggestive enough that it acts as a substitute. It's like a sweetener instead of sugar. It's still doing the same thing, maybe not as well, but it's still keeping that process alive, which is the important piece. So I think recommending some abstinence from social media is really important as well.
And I agree. And again, being intentional, like, what is my goal with this? Why is it really important in my life? Oh, all my friends are there. Are they really?
Yeah.
And also, yeah, like it was really interesting to me. I was talking to Lacey Bentley, who hosts the women's, sex, love, and porn addiction. And yes, women can be addicted to porn too. And she talked about, yeah, there's anime games that have porn in them. And I was like, really? I didn't go looking, but I was you have to be so intentional about all of these things because you just don't, you don't know what the content is. So making it benign of like, oh, it's just anime or it's just a game. No, like really, I think it's interesting. Our colleague Scott, says Game of Thrones is, porn with dragons, so he chooses not to watch Game of Thrones, and
Right.
like if you're going to be in recovery, it's being intentional about I'm choosing to do the things that will enhance my recovery and not create problems for me in another way.
The other thing, and there's different thoughts of this, but I was talking about my own grandkids a little while ago, but one of the people, one of my, um, the father, basically, of one of those families, um, is in recovery, good for him from alcohol, but he chooses to drink the non-alcoholic beers and stuff, which, and then it's a personal choice. And a lot of people with very good recovery do that. However, I think it's just also kind of that it's a substitute. It kind of it keeps those channels open, if you will, to me. And it's something I wouldn't choose to do. It's a personal choice. But I think it's another sort of potential back door that we just have to really be careful to keep everything intentional. That's a beautiful word for this process because it's just like being conscious and mindful of what we're doing, right? And having nothing kind of be automatic because that's when we really get in trouble.
Yeah, and like with non-alcoholic beer, and again, no judgment on that, but I would have to be, I always examine my motives. Am I thinking it's going to be just
Yeah.
like having a beer, or would I be just as happy having a water? And, I mean, like
Yeah,
at the end of
exactly.
the day, it really is what am I expecting from this? What am I expecting from social media? What am I expecting from, gaming? What am I expecting from food? And you're right. I often see, people, especially alcoholics new to recovery that gain a lot of weight. Me too. I did the same thing,
Yeah.
yeah, and it was very difficult in order to really find sobriety. I had to be intentional about all of those things, but it's so good and it's so worth it, and it is work. I mean, it's asking us to, this is the path you've been on, and we're asking to go this way, and we didn't get the tools to do it, initially, so we have to learn. But like we're saying, with 12 step and all of these recovery tools, you don't have to do it alone.
Yeah, and a lot of people have gone down this path, ahead of you too. So there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
wisdom, right?
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
just
And
have
it's
to
always
connect.
take what you need, leave the rest. Somebody who's
Exactly.
on like, yeah, absolutely drink non-alcoholic beer. And that's working for them, all good. But, like what is my intention for recovery? And yeah. So what do I don't do anything that is, like like even put me on, in that thought pattern. I just don't need it. Like
No,
I
no,
don't
no.
need the mental gymnastics of having to, what am I doing? So yeah, it's easier just to, do things the other way. So well, we've got a couple of questions. If you're going to do the 12 step with integrity, you can't pick and choose your programs. You can't go to your AA meeting and get your pat on the back for your million years of sobriety and then go home and look at porn and gamble and eat your way through the kitchen or whatever other addiction. That's just substitution. To do the 12 steps with integrity, you have to apply the steps to all facets of addiction. If you can't do that, then you only have white knuckle sobriety and not true recovery. I don't see a question in here, although I do, like if you're doing a searching and fearless moral inventory, if you're doing the steps, like, because just warming a seat at 12 step is not going to cut it, for the long haul. It'll keep you, not acting out for a while. But if you're doing a searching and fearless moral inventory, and it's always interesting to me, all these people that go, oh, I've been sober from, alcohol for 4 years and their sex is out of control. And I'm like, you know what the number one topic in 12 step. I mean, like there's a whole bunch of stuff in the 4 step of AA about sex. And I'm like, I think you kind of skipped that part, because if you're doing a searching and fearless moral inventory, you are, examining, and it's not just even the addictive patterns. It's like looking at all of the patterns in my life, it's across all areas. you know, good and bad. I hate to use moralistic, those, but we in recovery live a very examined life, and we have to be on that path. Comments?
I think the same thing, and I agree with what's been written here. And to your point of a lot of the people who see it seeking integrity who have extended sobriety from drugs and alcohol, right? And I think one of the huge mistakes that a lot of my profession makes, and I think seeking integrity is probably the only place in the country that doesn't do this, is that we look at, an addiction center and we'll look at the drugs, right? Well, let's treat the alcohol and let's get you sober and the sex will take care of itself. And that, so many people hear that and it's just not true. We see the wreckage of that at Seeking Integrity of people who, yeah, they say they are sober, right? They haven't ingested drugs or alcohol, but are they really sober in terms of their attitude and mentality and behavior? And because they've just substituted, they're full-blown addicts in porn or whatever. And eventually, of course, that unmanageability, it all unravels, and that's when they seek help. But I do think many treatment centers and even therapists are doing a disservice by kind of not recognizing the sex and porn behavior as an issue. And again, I think people are afraid to get into judging, right? Including sometimes family members. But I think, boy, we have to really take, like you said, Tammy, an examined look, really be conscious of what we're doing, because it will pay and it will stall our recovery. And as this person says, it'll lead to white knuckle recovery. That is not a smooth, happy, joyous, and free kind of existence if you got several addictions kind of in the back room going on while you're trying to live a life of recovery. That's a really difficult thing.
And I don't think it's really recovery. It's like abstinence in one area, but like you talk about
Yeah.
with smoking and vaping, you keep that dopamine going, so yeah, you're picking up chips, at one kind of meeting, and immediately going and acting out in some other way that, like, yeah, and again, not judging, and everybody's on their own path and it takes time, and yeah, whatever is deemed the primary addiction. But like we talk about, yeah, we have lots of people who've been through lots of, drug and alcohol centers, and, they're technically abstinent from that. And they'll even say, oh, I've been in recovery, for years, but they're doing all of this other stuff that is exactly acting out. Like it does the exact same thing. They're just using some other behavior instead of
Different
the
mechanism.
yeah, exactly. So,
Yeah.
and causing them, like, they're not getting the benefits of really being in recovery. And if they're in any kind of relationship, and this can be work colleagues or friends or whatever it is, that you can't be the best version of you if you're, still living a whole secret life. So, okay, the next question is, my spouse is over 5 years sober from drugs and alcohol, but he is an undiagnosed sex addiction and throughout. He started therapy for it 5 months ago. He is now gambling for hours and hours a day. I finally left him because he just seems to transfer addiction and not live in the principles of the program. It is painful, but I don't see it getting better anytime soon. Is this typical to transfer addictions?
Yeah. I'm sorry about your experience, but I think it makes sense to me to kind of remove yourself from that swirl of addictive behavior. And yes, I mean, that's classic transferring of those impulses. Because an addict gets used to a certain level of dopamine and intensity and sometimes even drama. And it's really hard when they stop distracting themselves or numbing those feelings, all that stuff comes up, whatever it is, and a lot of us have trauma or bad experiences or what we call adverse childhood experiences, things from way back, things from more recently, but addiction as a coping mechanism is used to deal with all that painful stuff. If we stop doing that without doing that examined life we were just speaking of, then all that pain comes up. What do I want to do? I want to avoid the pain. So I just find some other way to do that. And I think it's exactly what's going on. And I'm happy to hear that he's in therapy, because hopefully that therapist can pick up on this. If he's told the therapist, I'm a therapist myself, I can only work with what people reveal to me. And sadly, a lot of people spend good money and waste both our times not being honest, right, in therapy. So I don't know if his therapist knows that, but hopefully he does. But yeah, I think he's doing exactly that. He needs to face whatever's going on. I'm sorry about you and your situation, but I think, we talk about boundaries all the time, setting boundaries, taking care of ourselves. And it sounds like that's exactly what you're doing. So good for you. But I do hope he gets the help he needs.
And I agree. I was talking to a therapist earlier this morning, and her business is all about sex and porn addiction. And she said, yeah, sometimes we get clients that come for substance. And she's like, you know what we do? Oh, yeah. And she said, eventually, and she said, sometimes it's a year or two, that they go, I told you about the porn addiction, right? And then she'll say, no, you haven't really told us about that. Of course, there's a suspicion because you don't pick her practice if there's any of that, just, substances. But yeah, and I was thinking, gambling is, I mean, just like Dr. David was talking about that intensity, like the stimulant, seeking that, that's high intensity. And, you know, um, uh, and we've had a number of, clients come to our program who have spent have lost money that they couldn't even afford to lose. Like, it's like if it's disposable income and whatever, but at the end of the day, like there's a financial problem for them and family members because of their problematic gambling, gaming, whatever that has caused. But yeah, I mean, just think about the intensity. I mean, it's why casinos are so successful, because people just sit there and push a button, do, for hours and hours, and they're in this zone and numbed out and completely, hoping that the next thing is going to be a winner. But yeah, it's very addictive. We've had clients that have come to seeking integrity that had co-occurring gambling issues. Again, we're looking holistically across all the problematic behaviors to identify and have a plan for helping each client, navigate their recovery plan, for success, along the way. So
We had a client once I remember speaking to, who was a software developer from Silicon Valley, and was talking about how conscious and aware the programmers are that do social media, that do these designs of casinos. It's the same engagement of what we call the reward system, right? It's that the dopamine thing that humans are wired to do. And these guys have figured out how to take advantage of that and hook into that. And so, like gambling, like Tammy said, you go in the zone, people just are in that bubble or zone, and that is classic addiction. And these guys know exactly what they're doing, as do the social media people, right? They know exactly how to keep you hooked. In that case, to sell money, but they want eyeballs on that feed. And the gamblers and the casinos want it so they can reap the rewards of that. So yeah, my point here is that there's a lot of people out there who will take advantage of how human beings are wired. So it's up to us to be conscious and really not jump into that reward system that takes advantage. You know how else we can get dopamine? And this is that outer circle, for those of you that are familiar with that, all that the green circle, outer circle stuff, hugs, connection, listen to good music, take a run, do something you love. There's an umpteen ways to do it. And I think we have to consciously do that. I do a lot of work with methamphetamine. There's a lot of apps now in design and research to help people with methamphetamine, which may or may not work. I mean, it's a huge addiction, and an app, I'm not sure. But one of the principles, and I agree with this, it's called behavioral activation. And that means behavioral activation is just doing something that releases dopamine. And they really encourage people in early recovery to consciously substitute healthy behaviors that stimulate dopamine, because there's a deficit. And if they're aware that, yeah, I have this big gap, I need to do something to fill it in. And granted, the dopamine levels from having a run or getting a hug or helping a friend, all those things, those are going to be lower than these unnaturally high levels from gambling and sex and porn and amphetamines. So we have to get used to it's not as intense, but it's sustainable and quite wonderful, actually, right? Because you get not only dopamine, you get serotonin and norepinephrine, all these other oxytocin, these neurochemicals that give you a rounded, full experience, not just the intensity and kind of jittery intensity of the amphetamines or the gambling or the sex. Yeah.
Well, or food, like you're talking about,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
the food, like the comfort foods, the chips and all of those things, they are very intentional about the chemical, combination because, who ate one potato chip? Not me, I mean, so it's all intentional about, the sugars and fats and salts and all of those things,
Exactly.
so same thing, in being intentional about what we eat. Are we choosing to do this because we're hungry? Whatever, it was Super Bowl weekend, so everybody probably went a little, crazy, but, at the end of the day, making sure that we're doing things that, are helpful. You talked about outer circle. And I always think about, the outer circle is like we're head up and we're engaging in a meaningful way in life. And in our inner circle, we've got our heads down and we're missing out. Talking about gambling, like if you're sitting there at a little machine and hitting the button, like like I don't gamble, so like I was looking for the thing. Well, they figured out that if you have to push a button, you can do that a whole lot faster than you can pull a lever. They're really smart. So if you're just sitting there going ding 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 ding, you'll do that, for out. You won't even hurt, won't even get a tired arm, and it's so. But if I'm so focused on this, I'm missing out on all of these good things in life, like that are real connections. Like gambling or porn or whatever isn't nurturing. It isn't giving us anything except for that intense and escape. Okay, next one. Betrayed partner here. My partner uh, attend multiple seeking integrity for about 2 months. That must be drop-in groups and things, and SAA and SLAA meetings for almost 2 years. He's doing step work and working with a sponsor, but it seems he simply cannot be rigorously honest in groups or with me. While outright lying has really diminished, minimizing or curating responses to manipulate the listener to not quite understand his part of the problem he creates by never being able to get input from professionals or group members. It seems he just has to lie for his primary drug. I'm just at a loss for what to do. He's not actually getting any real help or improvement until he can stop the telling just enough routine. He is brilliant and with manipulative wording. It's making me feel hopeless. Could you say to him in the Seeking Integrity inpatient program? Could you even catch him at all the lies without our multi-decade history? Our partners interviewed before the inpatient process. So this is a lot, and Dr. David can talk more about residential treatment too, but yeah, partners are supported and they do provide collateral input, and it isn't catching. It's about transforming so that we don't choose to lie. Do I think he's a candidate for residential treatment? Absolutely. And and I've worked with lots of partners. They go, he's going to lie to you, and we go, yes, we know that. We know that from a base level. He's going to lie. He starts with lying to himself and all that. But Dr. David, you've worked directly with the clients in our program, so can you speak to how our program could really help this? Both of you,
Yeah.
like it's not just him; it will help you too.
Yeah, of course, because we know, in fact, almost all the staff is in some kind of recovery themselves. So we kind of takes one to know one sort of thing going on. But yeah, we know this, and the clinical team there is, I mean, really really sharp and catches this, and we have a team approach. So if one person kind of doesn't see something, six other people are going to. So yeah, there's a team approach. There's a lot of interviewing before somebody even gets to us, both to determine appropriateness, to talk to the partner, to get their side of the story, if you will, to get their input, because it's just classic. Every addict kind of curates a story, right, that conveniently misses a lot of the unpleasant stuff, and so or responsibility for their actions or whatever. So we're used to that. Um, when I was listening to your question and comment here, I think a lot of what I'm seeing, and the reason I think a lot of people are unable to tell the truth, and it's almost like a, as you were, it's almost like a compulsion itself, that this lying, and lying does become a habit, and that does start to get better, and that's you're observing that, right? The outright lies, which are almost automatic, that does get better, and that takes time. But this other stuff, the kind of not quite telling the truth, not quite going there, not quite, just kind of always dodging a direct, hit, if you will, in terms of responsibility or whatever. I think to me that just screams shame, shame and trauma. And I think when I see that, I would bet a client has it's not been safe for them in the past to be responsible for something, to even have a decision, sometimes to have a feeling. A lot of family systems are really quite critical of somebody like that. So I think what I'm seeing there from the kind of the human side, and I don't know anything about you or your husband, obviously, but I think I as a therapist with him, I would work on like what is the barrier here to just being honest? Because and sometimes we can fool ourselves, right? We're telling stuff and we believe it, but it sounds like he kind of is skirting the issue. As you say, he's very bright. I'm sure he knows what the deal is, what the real truth is. So why isn't he doing it? I always bet he may even want to. I think there's probably some really old barrier there that could be worked on with trauma therapy or with just therapy itself. Might be helpful. Um, it takes time, right? So I know you have some patience. You've exhibited some patience. It's probably going to take some more, but I do think he needs somebody that's going to keep him accountable, and that's where um, treatment I think is really useful because basically people don't get away with it in the residential program. Uh, as we move out of that less, controlled environment, it's easier to um, be less truthful, if you will. But I think he needs to get a therapist and a sponsor, and that they're going to call it on him. I don't know if you folks do check-ins, but I think check-ins are a really also a daily important way to kind of not only stay connected, but to kind of look at communication styles to see what's going on, to see if there's progress or not, to see if you can talk about direct responsibility for something or not. And then fuel for the therapy process. But yeah, I think in short, yeah, lying is typical. That does get better. Usually, people start to own what they're doing, right? And so it sounds like there's a little bit of a delay in that part of this recovery. And so I'd look at the causes for that. I know how frustrating it must be for you, because I think one of the big things any partner, betrayed partner, wants is for the addict to take responsibility for what they've done, right, and what they're doing. And so that must be not only frustrating but probably painful. So I would make that known, that this is his behavior, his inability. You may have done that already, but his inability to kind of be honest is having consequences and will have even more consequences. And that's where hopefully you're getting support. You can work on somebody that's working with boundaries for you, because I think this could be a boundary issue and that could be the solution. The thing with boundaries, as we've said often, is that you have to kind of be willing to follow through once you set it. So you want to think about it very carefully. And that's where having maybe a therapist or some wise person help you with that would be important. So yeah, there's a lot more to say about this, but I think that's a handful right there. You're muted, Tammy.
There's a reason because I keep getting my little tickly cough. But speaking of boundaries, we have a boundaries course for partners starting. Debbie McCrae is going to start that in April. And that's what I was thinking with all of this. What are your healthy boundaries about this? At 2 years in, and working with a sponsor and doing the steps, he should be well through all of the steps and, staying in 10, 11, and 12. And like Dr. David says, we catch ourselves, like if I do something, I go tell on myself at a meeting. It's important to me, what I have to know, but it's important for me if I messed up and needed to make amends to somebody else, I'm sharing that at a meeting because I want to take ownership of what I'm doing, and I don't want to gloss over it. So if he's on step one after 2 years, or steps 1, 2, and 3, like that, that doesn't really work. The people that don't work the step, working the steps is how we, move through things. Steps 4 through 9 are really the cleaning house steps. And step 4 says a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. It is, everybody gets scared. I was like, it's the most freeing thing. If you actually do this, it is the most freeing thing. So, and you don't do it alone, you do it with a sponsor, so but my point with this is, what are your healthy boundaries, around what he's doing and not doing? We get lots of partners that share that, they can almost tolerate the acting out behavior, but they can't stand the lies, and it's lying about everything. Dr. Rob shares in Out of the Doghouse, his most popular book, but for men who've been caught cheating, one of the partners, he got a divorce because he lied about taking out the garbage. And he's like, well, what? It's just the garbage. She's like, if you can't tell me the truth about the garbage, what else are you not telling me the truth about? And so at the end of the day, what are your healthy boundaries? It's not control or punishment, but this is not a person who is safe. Lies of omission or commission, they're still lies. And so if he's lying and minimizing, he's doing that to himself. And like Dr. David said, these are old patterns, and there's some benefit to him. He's, kicking the can for getting in trouble, or, it wasn't safe to tell the truth back, in his childhood, or our family has to look perfect. Who knows? And that's his work to do. But for you, holding the healthy boundaries of like, yep, if you've got the 24-hour rule for telling the truth, he's got 24 hours to show up and tell you the truth, and if he doesn't, then what are your consequences? And again, not punishment, but now you are not safe, and therefore I'm going to be over here taking care of myself, whatever it is. I can't encourage enough the Healthy Boundaries course with Debbie McRae. There's 2 parts, and I just put the link for the first part, but check them out. I think I'm so excited. I was advocating for that. We were hoping to start it in April, so we're a little behind that, but we've got it going. But like Dr. David said, this is a client for our residential program. Even if they've stopped the bad behaviors, all of this underlying stuff is still a problem.
And I want to just reinforce that, because I think a client like this would really benefit, because what would he be getting? He'd be getting 24/7 staff observation, comments, feedback, but only that, a group of men right with him. And I think oftentimes there's the power of that community, because guys eventually will call the other guys out on their BS, right? It's like, come on. And very often somebody can really hear it more from a peer than they can from their therapist. And so I think that the setting itself really is conducive toward moving somebody out of this place where they're stuck. So I think that might be really something to consider.
And I put the information about the work group in the chat, but I'll grab the stuff about treatment too. My husband had hit a bad bottom with cannabis and porn addiction 3 weeks ago. He's been sober from alcohol for 5 years. This is just like what we're talking about. Like, I haven't done alcohol. Yeah. I had no prior knowledge of the extent of the porn addiction until I found out very recently by catching something harmful. He started treatment for substance abuse 3 weeks ago and has been sober from weed, social media, and porn since then. He is starting a workshop with Seeking Integrity in March. My question is, what advice would you have for setting boundaries for betrayed partners? Right now, my husband and I are separated, but not discussing divorce while he tries to get better. We are struggling with how often it is healthy to talk or see one another. What have y'all found to be most loving and supportive for both partners? I'm going to grab some more resources and put them in the chat too while you answer this, Dr. David.
Okay. Well, first of all, that must have been a kind of a whirlwind shock for you. Unfortunately, as we spoke of earlier, this is not that uncommon a scenario, right? With people getting sober from one thing, and then this whole thing emerges, busts open. And by the way, cannabis and porn, people, again, we have this idea of cannabis. Oh, it's like it's legal, it's accepted. Everybody's grandmother doing gummies, and what's the problem? And cannabis is a really powerful drug that puts you in a certain headspace that unfortunately pairs very well with porn. And we find this a lot. It's a very powerful addictive combination. So first of all, I'm glad he's addressing it. I would be a little concerned about the treatment center that he's at to make sure they're really adequately addressing the sexual compulsive side of this. As I mentioned also earlier, a lot of the substance abuse treatment centers don't even want to talk about the sex or porn. At least it sounds like they are if he's absent from porn. But a lot of times, substance abuse treatment centers don't know some of the safeguards to put in place to help people with recovery porn addiction, like safeguards on their phone, for example, how to keep certain sites from being accessible and so on. So yeah, so good for him. I think in terms of your boundaries, and I'm glad you're taking care of yourself. You found some separated space. I think it's important. And you talked about wrestling with when to kind of re-engage, how often to re-engage. What I found with what I'm going to call a therapeutic separation, I'm not sure if that's how you frame this circumstance or not, but the just separating and having time apart isn't enough to make a change, right? I think the benefit of a therapeutic separation, it kind of gets you out of the midst of the drama, but it allows you as a couple to do your work kind of from a safer place. And so when it's appropriate, and I wouldn't wait too long, but I would coordinate with his therapy, but a couples therapist, a couples counselor, or a therapist or CSAT who understands this phenomena might be important for the two of you to engage, just to help you get some communication skills, to talk about different check-in modalities, to understand his addictive behavior better. But the bottom line, I think, for you at this point, my ideal recovery plan for a couple like this is that he gets his treatment, you get your treatment or support, you guys get kind of stable and grounded, and then re-engage, right? And that could take some time, but I hope you have some support for you right now. Your question is beautiful. You sound like you have a lot of insight. So I think there's a lot of hope here because I hear a lot of good things. You're in the right direction. I just think you need to be sure that you're taking care of yourself in this process because this has to be, it's the same kind of partner trauma we see from anything else that goes on, right? This is a huge shock. But there is help, and there's a lot of help available. And if I may shamelessly promote my book again,
Hold it
Sex
right in
Under the
front of you
Influence.
because it's the other.
Um,
Yeah, there you go. Because otherwise it
this is
blurs.
the book that talks about exactly what the problem is with porn and cannabis and other kinds of drugs and sexual behavior. So there's a lot of tools in there too, for mostly for the addict, but there's some things for the partner.
Well, and we have a family specialist that works with partners while clients are with us. So hopefully, whatever program he's at, they have something similar, and hopefully they are not using codependent language. Unfortunately, that's out there in a lot of programs where they go, "What is your part in this?" And you're codependent, and what are you willing to commit to doing for your own whatever. So hopefully they've got good support for you. We've got a betrayed partner work group starting the 4th of March. We have drop-in groups on this platform um, throughout the week. There's a number of different ones. Um, the boundaries course is separate, and you can do both of those. There's some boundary discussion in the betrayed partner work group, but there's it's a way deeper dive, all focus in the 2-part with Debbie. So there's resources for you. But Dr. David alluded to a formal therapeutic separation, and there's a plan for that. That is not just where we're separated with no plan. There would be, what are you looking to see? What are the things that would help you build trust? All of those, aspects of it. There's a plan, and this is not. I mean, unfortunately, we hear, people are separated for 3 years, and there's no plan. So what are you looking to see? What time frame? Usually 30, 60, no more than 90 days. So that you can get the help that you need. Just like Dr. David said, it's like, what support are you getting for you? There's betrayed partner, specialists, lots of people that work specifically with this. You can email me, Tammy, TAMI, at seekingintegrity.com and let me know where you're located if you're looking for something like that. But him getting very specific help for co-occurring addiction, and accountability and getting a plan, all of our clients have a comprehensive aftercare plan designed for what they need. Like we mentioned, gambling. Okay, then you can't just ignore that and go, well, just work on the sex and porn addiction, and everything will be fine. It's absolutely, you've got to have a holistic plan. So if he's getting that and you're getting support, then there's a path to connecting in a healthy way. You know, doing the work.
And if I could just throw in, Tammy, good at doing links to my Tuesday night group. Um, for
Oh,
your
sure. That's a
husband, I
great
was going to
idea. Yes.
mention,
Thank
I
you.
run a group on this platform Tuesdays at 5 Pacific, 8 Eastern, I don't know where you are, that is explicitly for co-occurring disorders like that include a drug and sex. So he'd be very at home with the group there of cannabis and porn, and I think it'd be really good for him on Tuesdays.
Yes. Thank you for mentioning that. So, and I put in, there's all the different drop-in groups. There's a special edition for betrayed partners. I'm going to say it. I was subbing in on a group earlier today. On Friday, we have a experiential. We're going to do some art in the drop-in group. So bring your paper
Oh,
and,
cool.
markers, crayons, colors, whatever, coloring pencils, and it's guided and supported, and can be really healing. So it'll be interesting. We're going to try it. It's just a one-time thing, but
Love
it'll
it.
be interesting. So, okay, the next question: the medications that are used for alcohol drug cravings, such as Camprol, Vivitrol, etc., do they have an effect on other non-substance process addictive urges such as sex, gambling, etc.?
Great question. And yes, we are finding that some of the medications that are used in what's called medication-assisted therapy in the substance use world, specifically naltrexone, um, which I believe is related to Vivitrol, maybe the same name. But naltrexone is the drug that you often hear started out with alcohol cravings, then they realized it helped for opioids. And now they've also discovered that for amphetamines, which had nothing until a couple of years ago, combining naltrexone with Wellbutrin, an antidepressant, quells cravings. But to your question specifically, naltrexone has also been shown to reduce cravings for behavioral addiction. So some sex and porn addicts in recovery are finding benefit of naltrexone to reduce cravings. Sometimes certain SSRIs, which is another type of antidepressant, are also used. So yeah, there are some tools that can help with this. As I mentioned always to my clients, this is not a cure, right? This is another tool we have to help us, like apps on our phone or meetings or whatever we do to assist. It's not going to be the answer, but it certainly does help. And I think the craving phenomenon is one that we really need to recognize because they can be very intense. They can be very triggering. Well, one of the things we do at Seeking Integrity is help people understand how to deal with cravings that, they pass. They're like a wave. They raise and they go up high and then they pass if you don't hang on to it. So there's different tools like that cognitively we can use, but the medication certainly is helpful. So I would check with a physician, a prescriber who understands addiction, who may be doing this, and they could give you a lot more information.
Okay, my husband was sexually molested by an older brother from ages 5 to 12 and outright raped by an elementary school teacher after school. He understood he was attracted to boys without understanding the word gay. So he had such entrenched shame and self-hatred that believing he had been he had responsibility for these offenses. His lying began by the time he was 12 just to survive his family in small town, when he became an obviously gay youth and then a sex addict by late 20s and now for decades. Can you explain, is there a way, is there any way out of line, which I see as dead center of the circles and overlapping addictions of sex, food, porn, hoarding? The list just goes on and on.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm sorry. That's a complicated history and has a lot of pain in it. We talked before about how lying, I think, is often a coping mechanism to deal with shame, to deal with avoiding stigma, discrimination, even violence sometimes. Where it's not safe to, even for ourselves, right, to recognize what happens sometimes, or certainly to talk about it. So I think lying is central to that. I think, and as we said before, lying can be resolved. It's not like an innate quality that people are born with. But so I think what I'd really recommend for your husband, if he's not done it already, is trauma therapy, or some kind of trauma-informed therapy, which can really look. And the beauty and what sets trauma therapies off, and there's many different kinds, from EMDR to internal family systems, somatic healing, there's a lot of them, but what they all have in common is the link to some kind of somatic element, meaning the body physically. So it's not possible to resolve trauma with just talk therapy, right? Me as a therapist sitting to my client in a chair talking about it. Because you have to really dig deep, because trauma is embedded physically. You may have had the experience or heard about somebody like getting a massage, a legitimate massage, and somebody hit a point, a pressure point, and somebody starts crying or they start laughing. The body holds these emotional things, and that has to be released as well. Trauma therapy does that. And I think trauma would help really resolve some of this stuff. This is really sad to say, but this is a pretty classic scenario. We hear this, the childhood sexual abuse is predominant in a lot of guys who become addicts later on in life. So I would just recommend good healing therapy support. There's a lot of shame that goes deep in these cases. So I think really trying to not to stigmatize or shame indirectly all helps. I Next Friday, this is, I don't know where you are, but I'm going to be speaking at a conference in Palm Springs called It Happens to Boys. And this is a conference every year that really goes to the heart of this, where this is a kind of an unrecognized phenomenon of how common this is with boys and the ramifications of that, right? And so there's a lot of information out there about this. So yeah, and resources, but there is help. That's my message. There is help, and it's just going to take some work and some time and patience.
And this is because I'm assuming these are active addictions, and everybody wants to go work on the trauma. And guess what? We run away from all our feelings and all of the trauma. So, Dr. Rob talks about it all the time. It's like you stop the problematic behaviors, and then you can address in layers all of those things. And yes, some people know the whys. Like I'm sure that is part of the why, and I'm sure there's even more, But if all of this is co-occurring active addiction, or he's jumping from one thing to the next, this would be really difficult on an outpatient basis. He's qualified for 6 different 12-step programs just from what you shared, and having the ability to address all of those, being safely cocooned in a and I'm our program does work with all of these things, and as co-occurring. Otherwise, finding a program that will be able to address all of those things, and not just go, well, we're just going to talk about this, would be key. Because if you leave something, hanging out there, clearly he's going to find an opportunity to open that door and do something else. The gift of recovery is healing from those things. It doesn't magically take it away. Dr. Eddie Caparucci shared last, no, September of, I don't know, I think 2023. Dr. Gabor Mate talks about you can't make something unhappen. So this happened, absolutely, you can't make it unhappen, and you do not have to be chained to that. What you do with it on a daily basis is adding to the trauma. So stopping the problematic behaviors, and then getting the help and support to pick away at that. But I mean that I'm sorry, that what an awful existence to be so compulsed to do all of these things. It's so hard to be in connection with anyone in a real and meaningful way when you're constantly doing some compulsive behavior. So as the betrayed, please lean into all of the resources I was sharing for you as well. There is help for you regardless of what he chooses to do. So okay, so Dr. David, the act does not share his treatment in progress. Should I wait for him to share when they are ready? We are 6 months in. The addict says he's on step 1 of 12 steps.
So, I think honesty is really a critical piece of this. And I think honesty involves having conversations even when they're difficult, right? So I think, and I understand in early recovery, it takes some time. These are radical changes of behavior, new patterns. But by 6 months, I think it would be really important to have some communication strategies, some being able to start sharing what's going on. Only if so people can help understand if people are on the right track or if there's big pockets that they're not recognizing or whatever. So I think the time frame from the communication point of view, I think is a little problematic. I think people should be having better communication patterns by that point. I also think people might want to be beyond step one. Now it's hard to judge where people are at, except in kind of generalizations. But I think by 6 months, I would expect people to be at least working on probably step four, or at least three, getting their handle on that. Now I know it can be a tough thing, and that there's highly variable circumstances for all that. But yeah, there are I'm not sure you're the partner, I don't think it says, but there are a lot of communication check-in formats that are helpful, like little outlines of daily check-in patterns for couples that talk about, feelings, behaviors, kind of strategies for what occurred during the day, whatever. They don't have to be long and involved. They can be 5 minutes. In fact, one of the protocols calls for it to be really short, because I remember was Seeking Integrity once, we had a couple that was doing this for like 5 hours every night, which was, not the most productive way to handle a communication. But yeah, this is too long. And I think there's something, again, there's like some invisible barrier here that we're not seeing, and I'd like to know what that is, right? Why? But I think sometimes it's skills, but a lot of addicts in recovery don't have good communication skills. So we always kind of build them in to the work at Seeking Integrity, and therapists do it as well. But I'd kind of question that and drill down on that a little bit, not be too polite about giving people space at that point. You muted.
On 2/7 of last year, Scott and I did a primer on 12-step, but this is the kind of stuff that drives me crazy. You're going to 12-step and you're still thinking that you can manage your life, like the first step is my life is unmanageable. Like there's a reason you start going to 12-step. To me, it is a stall. Oh, if I just stay stuck in the first 3 steps, I don't have to get to step 4. Everybody gets scared of step 4. And it is so freeing to do steps 4 and 5, and you do steps 1 at a time. Steps 4 through 9, I said it earlier, are the housekeeping steps. One of the promises of 12-step, you will be amazed before you're halfway through. There's 12 steps. Just think about it. Before you are halfway through, you're going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. Good things will happen if you are willing to do the work. So for me, this is like, like this would be boundaries from a partner. I'm watching your actions. I'm looking for you to change. I don't know how many 12-step meetings he's going to. Just warming a chair in 12-step doesn't change anything. How often is he seeing his qualified therapist? Is he doing our sex addiction 101 work group? He'll he'll have a solid 3-circle plan. What are his actions? If he's going to one 12-step meeting a week, like, if recovery takes 2 to 5 years, like triple that, like you get out of this what you put into it. You have to be willing to do the work. But for a partner, it's okay to go, I'm going to watch and see what you do. I'm going to take care of me. I want to be closer to you. But I need to see that your actions are really showing me that you're committed to this process and not, just dinking around, playing at recovery. You're in active addiction or active recovery. That's it. Active addiction or active recovery. You can't do both. Okay. All right. In early stages where both need to do their individual work, what's the best way you can navigate with young children?
I think young children don't have the cognitive capability to really understand mommy and daddy's sexual issues or other issues, right? I think it's inappropriate to talk about it in general terms. I think what they need, rather than specifics, is to really feel safe and in their own homes. And I think to do whatever you can do to encourage that would be really useful. Now, when kids get older, I think even teenagers, they clearly have a much better idea of what may be going on, or they know something's going on. I think to be a little more transparent as appropriate with them and as they get older. But young kids, I think, are just, they know something's wrong. They don't really understand. If you explained it to them, they wouldn't really get it. And so I think just to really do whatever you can to make them feel secure and grounded and safe is the way to go.
So Leilani Sinclair is going to do a webinar next week and in March, and she has worked with Dr. Ken Adams about adult children of sex addicts. I heard this from a partner a while back, and I was like, I love this. It's okay to say, mommy and daddy are working on bettering themselves, like that's all. And you can even say, yeah, we've got some things we need to work on. We're working on bettering ourselves. Enough said. Dr. Rob says all the time, no kid wants to know about their parents, sex life, even adult, kids. That said, I can't tell you how often, daughter, 8-year-old daughter finds, stuff on her phone because dad, took it, whatever, unfortunately, lots of kids have discovery. So then trauma therapy for, the children, like, I did, if you're working with qualified professionals for you, they can help you navigate, what is right, for dealing with your kids. There's obviously, I'm sure, tension in the house. And so understanding it's not about you, mommy and daddy, we both love you, and we're working on bettering ourselves, um, can be a helpful strategy. So, but check out the Leilani Sinclair one. So we are out of time. I'm sorry we won't get to the last, or do you have time for like one quick last question?
Sure.
We're getting, okay, we're going to do this next one, and then we're already 4 minutes over. So no more questions. I'm sorry. My partner has done so well with porn addiction recovery and trying to build trust back for the last year and a half. He's done some EMDR and goes to SPAA meetings, though he doesn't have a sponsor and hasn't worked the steps. Journals, does workbooks, and has done couples therapy for a year and a half. I'm in therapy as well. It has become apparent that he struggles with substances as well, and it's been a tough journey. It's been difficult for him to see how being dishonest or entitled about substances impacts my ability to heal or the betrayal. He sees that as separate issues. Should I be working harder? Should I be working harder to see them as separate? I'm starting to feel like it's hard for me to feel emotionally safe enough to be physically intimate. And he's voicing that this makes him feel unhappy in our relationship. This makes me scared that he will be unfaithful to me again. I feel like we're stuck in a dynamic and I don't know how to fix it. Hold up your book again, please.
Yeah, this one,
Yes. And right in front of you,
right? That work?
sex under the influence. That would be a good place for the two of you to start. And no, it's not separate. Like, no, like you can't be happy, joyous, and free. You cannot be sober if you're just sober in one thing. So please
Yeah, this is
share, Dr.
exactly what we
David.
spoke about
Yeah.
before. He's just transferring the addiction, and they are one big addictive system. And of course, you're feeling uncomfortable, and of course, he's feeling comfortable too because his little go-to has now been kind of called out a little bit. So, yeah, he needs to really work on that and see it as one big addictive system. And unfortunately, not every therapist is aligned with that. They don't get it. So make sure, hopefully, CSAT would, if he's seeing a CSAT. But yeah, this is really important to understand. These are not separate issues. This is one big addiction and with different outlets. And he needs to understand that. And I think you're feeling that at a gut level. And I encourage you to do what you need to protect yourself. And hopefully he'll get there.
Yeah. And when he's saying, when he's telling you it's different, yeah, no, it's difficult for him to see how dishonesty's been. Should I? No. So this is not about you. This is a him problem, and please, the healthy boundaries course work group, et cetera. And now I read this question and now like, we need to answer this one. I'm a sex and love addict. In my addictions, I sometimes put myself in positions where I got sexually assaulted and blamed myself for it. Now I'm stuck in step 4 because I'm afraid of reliving these memories and the trauma they come with. I'm not ready to accept that it happened, and I know I'm still in denial about the situation. How can I move forward? And we've had this with clients who come to our residential program, like, yeah.
Right. So I think this is where trauma therapy really is an important role to play here to help you deal with those memories, issues, to approach them and feel safe enough to kind of do the work to neutralize them, basically. That's what trauma therapy does. And so I think, yeah, getting somebody who can be patient and help you with dealing with the fears and the stuff that comes up when you start to deal with those issues is going to be really important and to get the support you need. This is going to be necessary work for you to heal. It's going to be painful work. There's a lot of resources and it can totally be done. But you have to find somebody to help you with the trauma piece.
Yes. And just what Dr. David said, to help you heal, you're just shoving that stuff in the closet. it's still festering in there. So like we have to, if we want to live in recovery and we want to, not be chained to that, then we have to be willing to do the work, but get the help. So, okay. Okay, now I'm gonna go cough. All right. Bye, everyone. Thanks, Dr. David.
But Tammy.